Just something that we hope to avoid. The director of the village said that there are 237 kids of elementary school age, and we think that most of them go to Ocean View, although we don't have exact data on that. But that would mean a lot of cars. There are some families with 2 or maybe 3 kids in school, but in general, there's a lot of like 1-kid families. So I think it's going to mean a big increase in traffic around the schools. So I think having a viable public transportation alternative would be in everyone's interest. We went to UC Berkeley about asking about shuttles. They didn't know. They didn't think that that would be approved. I talked to the school board. They don't have any money for buses. There's a service called Zoom that's like Uber for kids that the school could contract with, and parents could get a monthly package, but I really don't know how much that would cost. I checked for one ride just without a package, and a one-way drop-off would be $17, so that's not anything a student can afford. So yeah, I think, I don't know, like some kind of shuttle bus would be like very, very ideal. But we don't know if we could go to AC Transit for that. If because they have buses, they would get some revenue from the bus fares for that, whether it would cover, and whether the streets closer to the school are even open for buses. We aren't sure about those details. But we would like to have more discussion about that if possible. A lot of parents don't have cars, are thinking of buying a car or a second car. Yeah, we're in a tough place with this.
Can I engage?
Yeah, please.
So I'm a Safe Routes to School champion volunteer in Albany. Have you connected with the Safe Routes to School champions at Ocean View?
Not yet. We're going to be at the next PTA meeting and hopefully can connect with them there if they're there. If not, we could maybe get their contact information.
I can connect you.
Great.
So let's share contact information.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Is there another public comment on this, or? All right, come on up.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Wissam also. I'm a resident in the UC Village. I'm parent of, will be in second. Oh, I'm also a parent for a 6-year-old daughter. And essentially what will happen, as my friends mentioned, a lot of us are students in UC Berkeley, and when we calculate the total time, it will be almost 2-hour delay. And for me and a lot of parents, we will teach. We need to teach, and a lot of classes started at 9 a.m. And however we calculate the time, we won't be able to attend at 9 a.m. on campus. So we need and the demolition will take around 2 years. So if there is any long-term solution that a lot of the residents will be able to use. And also when we speak to the parent who live in Albany, specifically the parent who live in this side of the San Pablo, they also show the same worriness because a lot of them working in the city, and it's also whatever will be useful for the UC Village, the resident of Albany will be using it too. Thank you.
Thank you. Comment, Preston?
I was curious, do you know how often the 18 runs?
Yeah, it's every 15 minutes. So that goes Solano and then down into the village. So every 15 minutes.
Because that would
Get you.
that would work for Cornell School. I mean, it'd be right at Cornell, and presumably some of the elementary school students who are in the village would be going to Cornell. I mean, I presume they're not all going to be moved to the.
If you could actually, if you have comments, just people watching, if you can come up actually, if you wanted to talk. But maybe Preston can finish his thought and then we'll have you.
Yeah, and then the 18, I mean, there's a stop at the Greenway. So I think, Ken, on the idea of the walking school bus. I mean, that would be much faster if you can find some smaller group of parents who could.
The 18 also stops at Santa Fe, and that's a block to Marin, so that's.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And
So,
it
yeah,
continues on to UC eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the 18 would be, yes, you could potentially accompany children on the 18, and then some of the parents, I mean, it would take organization. I'm not saying it's easy by any means, but some of the parents could get off the bus and do what's called a walking school bus with the other children to the schools, and the other parents who need to teach at 9 would be able to stay on the bus and go right on to UC Berkeley.
Well, downtown Berkeley, close to UC.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And I have another AC question. So for kids' fares, that's not a full adult fare, correct?
It's half the
It's
price.
half,
Yeah,
okay.
so $1.20.
Okay. And then another question, do all the 18 buses, or do all buses generally have the bike racks too, or?
Correct.
Okay.
So every 18 bus has a 3-position bike rack.
Okay, so theoretically, somebody, if they have a child going to Marin, could take the 18 and walk their child, and if they biked, they could bike up to Berkeley, or just put the bike back on the bus and bike back afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if there's much better options than the 18, unless it dipped lower into UC Village, possibly, so that residents on the very west end of UC Village are not walking all the way up to Sprouts to catch, or to Jackson to catch the bus. So something similar to what the 52 would do. But in terms of getting all the way to the high school, that I believe a bus may have done that decades ago. I'm not positive. So I'm not sure if we could still have service on key routes. Actually, I think the bus was on Santa Fe, come to think of it. So I'm not sure if we can get a bus there easily. I think AC Transit would have to do some sort of public process to say, are we allowed to have these buses travel on these streets? But the 18 is a very close option. It's
Have
by
you
no means
introduced
optimal.
yourself?
I'm sorry, yes, I am Robert Del Rosario. I'm the chair of the Traffic and Safety Commission, and my other hat is I'm the director of planning for AC Transit, so I'd be happy to share with you my card and we can talk afterward, or by phone at another time. Did you have another comment to make? Please.
I don't mean to force your hand, but you did have a lot of information that most of us wouldn't have.
Yeah, so accessing the 18 is great from the village. For Cornell and Marin School, I think it solves the problem for the kindergartners. The main concern I have with that is walking all the way up to the middle school, which doesn't seem that far, but when you have a 6-year-old at 8 a.m. is pretty far. So that is, I think, currently one of the best, fastest options if you can get your kid to walk. Like, it's a bit more than half a mile. I think it's like 7/10 of a mile or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very convenient to get on the 18 in the village.
Yeah.
So
So for the middle school, you would look at the 72s, but then you have to walk all the way up to San Pablo, which is
it's
a hike.
it gets you a little closer according to Google Maps than the 18 does.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I know of one bike bus that's going to be happening, but that's starting at Washington and San Pablo, on the east side of San Pablo.
Okay.
But it might be possible to link into that as well.
Yeah, I think there's lots of creative solutions that this group and staff can look at and coordinate with whoever at UC Village to do all sorts of different modes other than getting in a car. Or if there is carpooling, I don't know if that's another possibility, but lots of different opportunities for walking, biking, transit, as well as carpooling.
Safe Routes to School has facilitated carpooling before, so that's something they could help with, I think.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
There's also, I mean, this is probably only for maybe older kids, but there was that signal I'm sure you're aware of that was installed on San Pablo in front of the senior living facility. And so that connects to Dartmouth and basically from there you can connect up to Marin School without a huge amount of difficulty. I'm not saying to walk it, but if there are older kids who could bike it, maybe with one adult, that would be another option, since there's a safe crossing of San Pablo there now.
But also, if you're walking, it might be worth going up Dartmouth to the Greenway, to the middle or high school, as opposed to walking on the major streets.
Any other comments on this item? Will definitely be continued, so there'll be lots more discussion on this, but we appreciate you guys coming out. Okay, on to the discussion and possible action on matters related to the following items. 5-1 is the commission work plan.
Thank you. So the previously recommended work plan was presented to City Council May 6th. Rather than go through the items in detail at the meeting, Council referred it back to the Commission, directing staff and the chair to meet with Councilmember Barnes, which we have, and to bring a revised work plan back to City Council. Comments from Council at the meeting included direction to focus the work plan on Council priorities, make the work plan more focused and more cohesive, focus on street safety infrastructure, such as PCI, pavement index, lighting, crossings, and to set priorities. Based upon council feedback and discussion with the chair, staff has prepared a revised draft work plan for your discussion. Changes to the work plan include identifying the relationship of work plan items to the capital improvement plan, organizing the work plan items by City Council strategic plan work plan items, and establishing prioritization based upon the council discussion, as well as a set of priorities that were removing a number of items as identified in the staff report. So I'm sure there will be plenty of discussion on this, but this hopefully gives you a good jumping off point. And one note, since there's been a lot of discussion already, I threw in a new possible terminology for the encroachment item. City-owned right-of-way rather than public property. Maybe that would be something that is acceptable to both ends of the spectrum.
Starting point.
Not meaning to get into another debate on it, but the encroachment procedures discussion, the next item, though, I think is relevant for whether it's city-owned or a privately owned public right-of-way easement. So I think that still needs to address both public and private, but another idea for communicating was city-owned right-of-way. But I'll hand it over to Chair if you have any other comments from the presentation, and open it up.
Sure. So I presented the work plan to the council a couple of weeks back. The overall sentiment, I think, is one that the work plan that we put together was more seen as a list of projects to the council as opposed to a cohesive work plan. And the list of projects seemed ambitious, overly ambitious for the council. So I thought that was one comment that we had to address. The other was that the council wanted to make sure that the work plan that the commission was putting forward was consistent with the direction of council, strategic initiatives of the city, as well as what staff had has in mind for the year or for the 2 years. So they wanted to make sure that we had more consistency with other documents that exist within the city. Councilmember Barnes and I did have a meeting with staff last week, and I think he just had some questions about some projects and how they were related to city strategies, and just more information on the projects that he had a few questions about, because it was really a list. So based on that, staff came back and tried to add a little more meat to the bones and really tie the projects that this commission wanted to advise on for the next 2 years and tie those to the city strategic plan or other projects that are already existing in the city's budget or CIP. I think the other piece of this is that we had to thin out the list of projects, and things that fell to the wayside were the projects that maybe weren't as tied to city strategic initiatives or were not as developed as other projects on the list. And so those are listed in the staff report. That's all of my comments.
Well, full disclosure, I also got a chance to look at this before it was pushed out, and
Right.
I had some formatting suggestions and just a couple of word comments, maybe some of which were included. And I suggested we bold the topics in each so that it would be easier to spot. And I am appreciative of staff's work on this to get it into a cohesive whole instead of just a list.
Thanks, Ken. Other questions on this? No public comment? Anyone on the public want to speak to the strategic or to the work plan?
I heard what you just said, but I'm still confused. So the city council, so maybe just a little bit more explanation. The city council had some comments. So the thing that I'm looking at now is the final one, or reflects the comments? Is that what you're saying?
The version now does reflect the comments of city council and the commission, the chair and Commissioner McCroskey's response to those comments. There were also direct edits from some council members on the document, and then there was a revision by staff taking all of these things and making it more of a plan with priorities and then tying them to strategic initiatives. So this draft version, if approved by the commission, would go to the council for consideration of approval.
Okay, so what we're saying is what you're, okay, I just wasn't clear on.
Okay.
They got incorporated, thank you.
Any other public comments?
Hi, I'm curious to see how the commission will react to all this, but my reaction is that it seems like the projects that made the cut were ones that are either pretty far along or are pretty basic things that the commission does all the time, and it feels a little bit like anything with a sense of vision has been cut out, and it's a little disappointing to see the city kind of narrowing the scope of what it's willing to take on in this way. It seems like they're just saying, well, this is what we do, this is what we've always done, so we'll just keep doing it. And I understand there's a limit to the amount of time the commission has to work on things. I just hope that some kind of more forward or ambitious ideas, new ideas, can still be part of the work that you guys do. Thanks.
Thank you. More public comment? Okay, back to the commission for comment. Who wants
Quick question.
Please.
I noticed that I think I'm correct on this, that the San Pablo Avenue Marin Extension intersection isn't on the list anymore. Am I correct on that? It's CIP 24001. Oh, wait. Oh, it's on our list of completed. Right, so I'm wondering if that was one of the things that council specifically requested. So this would be Buchanan Phase 4.
It's on the cut list. It's at the top of the second page.
Right, okay, great, it's on the cut list, right. So I'm wondering if that was a specific direction from council?
I did not get that direction in my meetings with council or at the council meeting itself. I don't know if there was correspondence from council to staff about that.
No, it wasn't. It was just part of trying to pick priorities and per their direction, but it wasn't called out specifically.
Well, we actually had an agenda item last meeting where staff said that that was on their agenda. So I would suggest we put that one back in.
Other comments?
Sure. So first, I think some of the things have been cut, and otherwise, while this work plan has been in the wash, have actually become accomplishments. So I think there's some update to the accomplishment list. Tonight, later on, we're going to be reviewing and advising on the Hawk Beacon. So it would be good to add that, because by the time this goes to council, that will be an accomplishment. And we did review post-project monitoring of Phase 3. I think that was an agenda item we had maybe 2 times ago, I don't remember. We reviewed the Cordonesis Creek Trail design between 8th and 10th. And we reviewed pavement management planning and improved the functional street classification inputs to Street Saver. And you don't have to write all this down. I'll email it to you if you want, if that would help. Feel free to write it down if you want.
You're requesting these be added to the accomplishments list?
Yeah, because, I mean, these are all things that have happened just in the 4 months that I've been on the commission.
Are any of these projects for the future years that we have to move?
I think some of them were on the cut list. Some of them were on our previous list, but they've been done by now. So I just think to show what we've been up to, and particularly review pavement management planning, because there was a specific expression of interest that we focus on pavement. So to make it clear, we've been doing that. In fact, we had 2 meetings where that was the main item. We reviewed the Solano plan and made a recommendation. And we provided input on Albany to CTC San Paulo Avenue planning. So I'd like to see all those added to the accomplishments, because that's at least what's been up in the last 4 months I've been here. As far as additions, I guess one thing I did is I went through the items that are in the current draft plan and sort of sorted them by what I thought of as, a major item for a meeting, kind of a more minor item for a meeting, an item that seems like it's really minor and or potentially done, to try to get a feel for over the, I think it's 20 meetings that this work plan covers. It's 2 years, and I believe there's about 10 meetings a year, if I count that right. So 20 meetings, so we could handle, approximately 20 major items, and then the minor items that go along with that. I only came up with maybe 6 major items. So the major items I came up with were the Masonic intersections with the Marin and Solano design, red curbs and intersections. I know the policy's been passed, but the item that was there is to prioritize where
Did you
that.
say Marin and Solano intersection?
I'm sorry, Marin and Masonic. The intersections of Masonic with Marin and Solano. Thank you very much. And update active transportation plan. Review pavement. I mean, there's an item on there now that's review pavement funding, so that's a pretty potentially substantial if it leads to a recommendation of a measure. Street lighting evaluation. So those are the only ones that I found that were like definitively major items. Solano plan and San Pablo plan are on there. It's not clear to me those are coming back to us over the next 2 years. I really don't know. Do you have any information on that? Staff? I mean, the Solano plan's kind of at council now, so whether it comes back to us or not, we don't really know. It might. And the San Pablo plan is at Alameda CTC. My understanding is they're going to make some decision on a direction this summer. I don't know if they're going to come back to the cities on that, or they're just going to make that decision and then go ahead.
Yeah, those items were kept in because I was organizing by council strategic plan work plan items, and those were the ones that were under that category. They're not necessarily large items compared to the other categories, so
Okay.
they may or may not
Okay.
be coming up in the work plan time horizon.
So I gave items like that, and there's a number of other ones. I'm not going to go through them all, kind of a half rating, because we don't really know if they're going to come back. They could come back major, they could come back not at all. So it seemed like we have quite a bit more capacity than this work plan indicates. Now, I know the council didn't think of it that way, but that might be a way to organize the work plan, is kind of categorize well, it is categorized, but I don't think it's clear to the council when they look at a bullet, is this something that's going to be
Right.
the major item for a meeting, or is this kind of like fairly rote? Like there's implement traffic calming projects in there, but all of those have been designed and approved. So I don't even really know hardly what our role would be in that. Like the Brighton Avenue traffic calming is, as I understand it, is designed and it's engineered and done. So what looks like it might be a major item to council for us is done.
I'm reading the Solano Avenue bullet there as projects that may be associated with implementation. So it could be individual projects that come back. So while the plan may not come back to us, pieces of projects tied to it may. So.
Some Pablo will probably, I don't know when, but environmental process will get underway in the next year. And last for
Ever.
years.
Right, so, I mean, that's why I'm kind of like, well, if they choose a direction this summer, what's the chance something comes back in 2 years to this body? Based on my experience, I don't know. You might have a better feel, because this is your field, isn't it? Or do you work on EIRs, or?
I do.
Yeah, so you might have a feel for what something like this
At
would
least a
look
year,
like.
I would guess, if
Yeah.
not longer.
Yeah. So I guess my suggestion is, it seems to me that there's some more capacity, and
Can I challenge your assumption?
absolutely, I love having assumptions challenged.
Oh no, I'm falling into his trap. You talked about a 1-to-1 meeting to major project ratio, and I think that's ridiculous. When we have major projects, we revisit them at multiple meetings. They're usually an ongoing cyclical sort of process for a while, and then they may peter out after a while, but I don't think you can map them 1-to-1 with a meeting.
Yeah, that's fair. So like if there is an update to the active transportation plan, which
Oh,
is
my goodness.
a question at this point because there's no funding for it.
Right, but if there is.
If there is, then that would be
That's going to take a lot of bandwidth.
Right.
And I would hazard a guess that the year that we created that plan,
Right.
we spent at least half our time on it. Or more?
I wasn't staffing the commission in those days, but I would say, yes, you will spend at least half, if not more, on if and when we do the next active transportation plan. That's a big deal.
Right, so that could be like 6 meetings.
But for that project, it was 6 meetings where we only talk about that,
Right.
equivalent.
Right. Okay. Well, so do you think there's more capacity, or do you think what is on here will fill up the time for the next 20 meetings, or next 20 meetings?
I think it's entirely possible that what's on here will fill us up. There tend to be things that come up along the way. I talked about one item that I want to see put back. I also think that if we come across something that we really care about, we can apply to the council.
Okay, well, I'm going to make a pitch for some items. I think as we've heard tonight, there's a need for a safe route to Cornell Elementary School from south of Marin. And that was an item that was taken out. And if that project had been completed by now, that would help the speakers we just heard about, because they would be able to walk from Albany Village, cross San Pablo safely, go up Dartmouth, then along Talbot, and cross Marin safely. And so they don't currently have that safe route to school. So I think what's going on with the schools makes it even more apparent how important that is. The Cerrito Creek Connector Phase 2, or sometimes called the Pierce Street Path Phase 2. I was just in a meeting earlier tonight that was germane to that, having to do with the prospective housing that's at Cleveland and Washington. So I don't know why that wouldn't be on our agenda. That's clearly a project that is going forward and will have an impact on what the shape of that particular segment of cycling infrastructure looks like. So I would think that reviewing that project would come to this body because of that nexus. In any case, so I think it's good to reflect it on the work plan, because I certainly like it to come to this body, and I think it's appropriate that it comes to this body.
Did you say the Cerrito Creek completion of the trail is related to the
Saha, the housing, the affordable
housing that's
housing.
taking place over on Cleveland at Washington?
Yeah, so the original grant for designing or for planning that trail came from ABAG's Bay Trail project, and it's officially called, at least in documents long ago from the turn of the millennium, if you will, the Cerrito Creek Connector Trail. So it was envisioned as a connector trail to connect from the Ohlone Greenway to the Bay Trail. Now, jurisdictions have varied. It crosses three.
Wait, I
So-
see where my problem is.
Okay.
Just to, I
was
think
thinking
I
the
can
wrong
provide the
creek.
clarification.
Sorry?
It's connecting from that cross connection along Pierce Street. It's labeled in the, here as the Pierce Path Segment 2 or Phase 2.
Great. Okay. My mistake.
Sure. Yeah, I think I tripped up and started to say Cordonesis Creek, so you might have heard that.
That's what I heard, yeah.
Yeah, I apologize.
No.
And then city standards, I mean, there's really only one element to that, and that is to once and for all kill diagonal curb ramps. So this body in 2006 voted that no diagonal curb ramps should be installed in Albany, and yet as recently as 2014, I think, they were still being installed. There was one that was installed where a valley gutter was also being installed as part of that project. So now if you use the curb ramp and it's raining, you're being directed right into where both gutters are converging. You know, it's just not a good situation. And I know, I believe some of the council members, I believe, were on this body when that was passed, and it's never been embedded in city standards. So I think it would be something fairly simple. There's already a policy. So I would like to get that actually in the standards. And yeah, that's it.
Other comments?
I would support the Cornell Safe Routes to School at Marin and city standards if it's specific to curb ramps.
Agreed.
I would also support that. I think anything related to schools, we should always make a priority at this commission. So I think on the list that was crossed off, that's the only school-related project, I believe. I'm fine with the standards as well. There's the Buchanan parking right lot, that project's happening, so either we're not going to comment on it or, and it's going to go forward without any you know, input from the commission, or we do. And I think if it's a project that's brought onto the city's lap, then that's something that we should comment on.
Well, I think
Just monitor.
when I used to sit out there, I remembered seeing the drawings for that come here.
It did.
I did.
It did.
So there was commenting.
And it's under construction now. I don't know if there's still more monitoring that we would have to do, or if we have to be hands-off, but if there was some monitoring, it'd be very small. I don't know, it's staff.
There are some agreements that we're waiting to, we're told to expect in terms of how who's going to maintain the facility and enforcement of parking and so forth, but I don't know that we haven't gotten them yet in any sort of form that's, we haven't been able to evaluate them or negotiate them or anything like that. There might be a role for commission in that, or there might not be.
Yeah. Well, presumably, if you're going to have agreements, those could come to the commission and then go to council.
Sure, if it's related to, if it's, you know, who's going to write the parking tickets, you may not, we wouldn't normally bring that to you, but if it affects how people can use the parking facility, then yes, I would think that this would be the public forum for starting that discussion.
So if there's changes to the configuration, that's something we probably would want to weigh in on. So unless something comes up that you feel substantively changes the operation and connectivity for pedestrians, for example, doesn't seem like there's much for the commission to consider. If those come up, hopefully, even though it's not on the work plan, something, you know, kind of becomes an urgent item, it might make sense to, you know, toss that in here.
And this is a project where there was a consultation of the city, but I wouldn't necessarily say there was a lot of collaboration with the city.
Sure.
So we certainly provided them the comments that you provided some time ago, but how they choose to react is it's completely a Caltrans MTC project. We don't have any we didn't permit it, we didn't inspect it, we're not inspecting it. We're not signing off on the final form of it, except for maybe these agreements once they send them to us.
There are portions of that project that are on the city street. Presumably those would end up in the city's hands? Buchanan, or that's a question?
That's the maintenance discussion.
Okay. I have a procedural question. Under this, what to me is a little more stringent process of work plan and sort of blocking things out, if somebody came to traffic and safety and requested something, we'd have to say either we agendize requesting that to work on that from city council, or we suggest the person go to city council.
We wouldn't want to needlessly send anybody running around to different meetings. I think we try to use common sense if there's something that needs immediate attention. I think if we're all in concurrence, it's something important to work on, I think we'd go ahead and work on it. And I could check in with the city manager to see if there's something that she felt needed attention. If there was something that was kind of out of the blue, that either the commissioner staff felt like maybe this isn't a good use of time, then that would, yes, then there's a little bit more formal process to go back and check in with the council on amending the work plan or reprioritizing things.
Okay. So there's some leeway for staff to take up issues.
Sure, and for the things that aren't on the list, if they may still be important to the commission. It's just kind of, I look at it as a prioritization tool, and particularly at the early part of the work plan period, it's useful. As we get towards the latter part of 2021, we'll probably going to be moving further and further away from it. There'll be lots of new things that none of us have thought of yet, and that's kind of the natural cycle of something like this. So.
Do you think the city council understands it in that way?
Yeah, actually, I think they do.
Okay.
Any other comments? So staff is looking for a recommendation from the commission to put forward a revised work plan. Looks like we had a number of edits for both accomplishments as well as projects to incorporate back in.
I can make a motion if you'd like.
Please, if that's.
Yeah. So I won't belabor the accomplishments. I'll just send you those by email. But in terms of I move to approve the draft work plan as formulated with the addition of Buchanan Marin Extension, or San Pablo Marin Extension Phase 4, and the Cornell Elementary School Safe Routes to School project at Marin and Cornell Talbot, a Pier Street Phase 2 path consideration, and consideration of city standards with regard to curb ramps. I think that got it all. Did I miss anybody's item? Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay. Great. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the recommendation passes. And thank you to staff for working with both parties to come up with a revised plan. Appreciate it. Okay, item 5-2, policy framework for processing encroachments into the public right-of-way.
So it's nice to be able to get to this agenda item. It's been on your agenda for a few meetings, and it's been towards the end, and we haven't been able to get to it. This came about a while ago when there was a particular situation on Nielsen Street where there was an encroachment. A homeowner was building a wall in the front yard that encroached into the public right-of-way. It happens every few years. We've had situations like this pop up, and we've worked on it and resolved the issues on kind of an ad hoc basis. But what we'd like to do with this framework, this proposed framework, is to set up a regular procedure, not trying to make it too bureaucratic, but just want to lay out a standard procedure for dealing with situations where there are fences or walls or something that encroach into the public right-of-way. There are some images in some of the material that were attached to the staff report to give you an idea of the kinds of things that happen pretty routinely. There are a lot of these all over town that have been there for decades, and then, as I said, they occasionally come up. We had a situation with, for example, the YMCA. I think they needed to have a slight encroachment for one of their emergency exits. There was a building on Solano that was approved but never constructed. It was a dental office at Ordway and Solano, and the way the slope of the site worked and the accessibility requirements, they needed to do some steps that encroached into the public portion of the area. So, and like I said, we've dealt with this on kind of an ad hoc basis, and this is to more formally memorialize that. To summarize what's in your staff report, the kinds of requirements that we'd want to make sure that are complied with. The first is kind of an alphabet soup of acronyms of different codes: municipal code, building codes, planning and zoning codes, ADA accessibility codes, utility companies, clean water requirements, and there are actually some more. But making sure that whatever happens is in compliance with those standards. And most important is to make sure, and the role, I think, for the commission more than anything else, is to judge whether a proposal is going to affect something that we might want to do as a city in the future in that area. The third is just good risk management of making sure that there's liability insurance in place for that encroachment. And then finally, it is just, while it may be there for a long time, that we do have a process to go back and remove it or revoke it if we need the area or it's not being maintained properly. In terms of processing these things, again, it's been ad hoc. Sometimes the Planning and Zoning Commission has looked at it. Sometimes the Traffic and Safety Commission might look at it. Although it's not written in the municipal code yet, the way that we think about the difference between planning and zoning and traffic and safety is planning and zoning is really looking at development of structures and buildings and primarily private property or structures and buildings on public property, but in not affecting the transportation infrastructure. This commission looks more at the transportation infrastructure, and thus you should probably, in many cases, have the lead, and almost certainly there'll be a collaboration between the two commissions if they're processing a building and you're looking at the impacts on the infrastructure. Want to formalize the process a little bit to match what we do in planning and zoning, just so that we are following best practices, make sure that we're have an application that's complete, that we do a public notice, that we have written approvals to give you the legal authority, or the city council, depending on who ultimately approves it, the authority to impose conditions of approval, and then have an appeal process so that if someone is unhappy with the decisions that's made, there's a documented way that gets run up the flagpole. At this point, I don't have anything else planned in terms of a presentation. I know Commissioner Jordan had a different approach to this, and I'll leave it to him if he wants to address that or not. But our main goal here is to set up a procedural framework so we're treating everybody the same way, basically. And we have a roadmap that we can show people if they want to do something like this. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
So how would when would this, I guess during site plan review, the city would determine if there is going to be proposed improvements that would encroach within the right-of-way? Is that when this would occur?
It could. So in the example I gave of the dental office at Solano and Ordway, that was in the site plan review. They were trying to make the slopes work, and we went to found the only way to really make it work well was at that stage. The other example I used with respect to Nielsen Street, that was a standalone initiative by the property owner to it was a unique piece of property. We don't need to get into the details of it, but they just went out and built a retaining wall as a standalone project.
Any other questions? What about liability for existing properties that are encroaching on public right-of-way?
Right. So that's kind of there are a lot of long-standing situations. In a perfect world, we would have time to grind through those and document them and make sure that there are agreements in place and people have the proper liability insurance. We're not proposing to be really aggressive about that unless we think there is a situation that really needs attention. But if someone were to come along and say, oh, we're going to remodel our house and we want to add room to the back, if there was a situation in the front, we might say, okay, good, this is the time where we can take care of that front yard encroachment. But we certainly, I don't want to leave anybody the impression that we're going to go around trying to make people take down their nice little white picket fence that might be in the front yard that encroaches a few inches into the city right away. It's the public right away, the transportation. What is it?
City-owned.
I just can't get that out of I'm sorry, I've been doing this for too long. Yeah, we're not trying, we don't have the time to do that kind of thing, even if we wanted to.
So if somebody had a retaining wall that was right on the sidewalk and they were adding a bedroom to the back of the house, the city, as part of the review process, would notify them?
We would start to look for that, yes.
Okay.
And then would the standard homeowners insurance cover that type of liability that could potentially happen if property's in the public right-of-way?
You know, I'd have to look into that. I don't know what an insurance company would actually say about that. At the very least, if we could get an indemnity or a hold harmless agreement, that helps us a little bit.
Yeah. Looking at the maps that were in Preston's report, there's a lot. I mean, every majority we're encroaching on.
Well, there's landscaping encroaching is another thing to have
Sure.
something that's a substantial structure where it's maybe more likely that there would be a problem.
And do we know, is this just an Albany specific issue, or is this Berkeley and El Cerrito, and this is a common
This is
thing?
this is a very common situation in older cities. I meant to scan a document that shows the subdivision design guidelines that were developed by the U.S. government in the early 1900s that cities like Albany used in laying out the streets. It's a very standard requirement. It's all over Berkeley and Oakland and Albany that I'm aware of. Newer cities and suburbs, mostly I think post Proposition 13, when development economics kind of changed, the newer subdivisions will have the land is privately owned either by the property owners or by a homeowners association. There's an easement that's granted usually to the city or that establishes that right-of-way area as being available to the public for transportation purposes. But any older city has that as a pretty standard situation. I live in Oakland. It's in my house. It's in my neighborhood. It's not unusual.
I was looking at the what staff is requesting of the commission, and it's just to provide comments. So what would the process be, and is this something that you're looking more for approvals from planning and zoning and city council, or is there some sort of action that would be eventually taken at this level?
Eventually, there would need to be either a municipal code, probably a municipal code amendment, and it would go hand in hand with some of the other amendments to the municipal code related to the commission, and maybe some administrative policies as well. At this point, haven't mapped that out in detail until we get direction from you that we're on the right track in terms of what you, the general format of the process, and then we'll decide exactly where we think it should go, and then bring that back to you.
I don't know if there's members of the public that want to comment, but Commissioner Jordan's presentation was also included as part of the staff report, so we could have the commissioner present first and then get public comment, if that's okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I thought that would be better in terms of the public having a chance to comment on both. So I don't know if you can switch to this machine. So this is an analysis I did using GIS based on data from the city on the city's GIS project. And so the streets that are in the R1 zone, or the single residential unit per lot zone, are colored by the amount of public property that is between the outer edge of the sidewalk and the private public property line. So you can see it varies quite a bit across the city. So in some places it's less than a foot, like along the west side of Key Route, south of Solano. In some places it's more than 7 feet. So you can imagine when you're walking down the sidewalk, there's places where the 7 feet of landscape that's next to you is actually city property. And there's places where none of what's next to you is in city property. So just to look at this difference across the city and illustrate that, analyze that, and broke the city up into these 4 different areas, and then plotted parcel by parcel how wide is that strip of city property. And so you can see the central area there, which is between Masonic and San Pablo, is the blue bars. And so 80% of those properties have 1 to 3 feet of public property between the property and the edge of the sidewalk. If you look at the southeast area, which is south of Solano and east of Masonic, there's only about 20% of the properties in that area that have that width of public property. Conversely, there's 35% of the properties have 5 to 7 feet, essentially in what otherwise appears to be their front yard. So it's pretty heterogeneous across the city. It's not random by any means. You know, it's highly spatially correlated. And then this is an analysis of how much public property by square footage, by area, is associated or is in front of each of those parcels. And this is, again, public property that's back of sidewalk. So again, you can see that varies quite a bit. A lot of the properties that are between Masonic and San Pablo, it's 0 to 100 feet. A few, it's 100 to 200. You look in other parts of the city, and most of them are 200 to 400. Some of them are 400 to 800. You know, and you get up to 800 square feet. That's pretty substantial. I mean, the smaller lots in Albany are 2,500 square feet. So that's the equivalent of a third of one of those whole lots. So this is thinking through this, which I didn't know about at all till this item that Director Bond described, of the individual building a retaining wall on public property and basically enclosing that property into their private front yard or semi-private front yard. I'd never realized that this public property existed before. So I've been thinking about, what does this mean? Is there opportunity? Right now, the Climate Action Committee is in the process of developing a climate action adaptation plan. And one of the adaptation elements is to set a target for % of tree canopy in the city to compensate for the increasing temperatures that we're already experiencing actually pretty dramatically, and obviously we'll be experiencing more dramatically. And in order to do that, you need a wider landscape strip. So one idea that's come up is, over time, expand the tree wells, potentially expand the whole landscape strip so you can actually get bigger trees that have a substantial canopy. So that would have an implication of not allowing encroachments within some distance of the curb to allow for that future growth of tree wells, the sizing up of tree wells. And we kind of see that the impact of some of these encroachments already. If you go around town and you look at a lot of the tree repairs, which are due to street trees, there's places where quite a few lots where people built a fence, a low fence in their front yard that's to code. And the city has widened the tree well, but by narrowing the sidewalk. So the sidewalk's been narrowed to less than what's in the city standards, which is 5 feet in pretty much all those cases. I don't think that's a big deal, but we're already seeing the impacts of having these encroachments that have not been legalized essentially. They're impacting the choices the city gets to make in terms of the sidewalk and its landscapes. So my first thought is that no encroachments should be allowed within some distance back of curb to allow for increased landscaping along the street. It could also be used for green infrastructure, so for stormwater treatment, swales and whatnot behind curb. And then beyond that, there are some streets where there's a sufficient continuity of public property to build a cycling micromobility facility that is separated from motorists. And this is actually called for in our current climate action plan. So our current climate action plan, this is called a stage 2 facility. It's a motorist separated facility. It's behind parking. And so the streets that I see where that looks like it'd be possible are Marin. So you can see continuously along Marin, there's 5 to 7 feet of additional public property behind the sidewalk. Santa Fe, same or more actually. And then Washington and Portland to the east of Key Route. So in those locations, the proposal is that encroachments aren't allowed. Structural encroachments aren't allowed at all. Now this brings up the idea of rescission, that the proposal is that structural encroachments be allowed with the caveat that the city can rescind it at any time. But I think the political reality is if half the property owners along a corridor have put structural improvements on city property, and then the city comes along and says, well, yeah, we want to convert this to something else, it's going to be a huge battle to, so the letter of the law is that the city can do it, but then, there's other avenues. There's going to their council members to fight that improvement. So I think allowing those improvements to happen in the first place really forecloses, in practical effect, not in legal effect, but in practical effect, the city being able to use its property for public good in the future. And then finally, I think that's the final one, public property that doesn't fit into either of those two previous categories. And there's some areas of the city where that's the case, where a substantial square footage of property, it's not in one of these corridors, it extends much further back than 10 feet from the curb. Rather than just saying, sure, for a one-time nominal permitting fee, you can have the city property to use as you wish with our approval, build a retaining wall and put it in your front yard, that the city would instead make that property available for sale to property owners who are going to build an ADU. So that would be a way to get more housing into portions of the city that are the lowest density portions of the city potentially. So it would further the city's interests in meeting its regional housing needs assessment goals. And there could be other carrots potentially. That property could be sold with the bonus of what's called a floor area ratio of 1, meaning if it's 600 square feet of property, then they get to build 600 square feet of building when they buy that property. Not necessarily right on that spot, obviously. The setbacks would still obtain, which is 15 feet from the front property line, but somewhere on the property that's aggregated as a result. And so with this, I would suggest conferring with the Social and Economic Justice Commission and the Planning and Zoning Commissions, because it's obviously germane to their interests, one in terms of housing equity, obviously planning and zoning if it's going to get into floor area ratios. And then finally, on properties, other properties, the city would allow a structural encroachment for fences, retaining walls, but rather than it being a one-time fee, which leads to people thinking I own it now, it would be an annual fee to basically lease the city's property. And that would remind that property owner every year, this is not your property, it's the city's property. The city can come back and take it back, just like any landlord can do. And in terms of treating everybody equally, I mean, I think one of the issues that catches my eye is the city can't treat everyone equally. If it just allows a one-time fee for adjacent property owners to come in and use public property, because not all properties have the same amount of public property in front of them. So the approach of providing a one-time fee to come in and use public property is really going to benefit to a much greater degree a certain part of the city relative to another part of the city. And as we received in a written comment, the city should not take that approach without some kind of policy justification. And I can't see any policy justification for making massive amounts of city property available to some private property owners when it can't be made available to each and every private property owner on an equal basis. Thank you.
Do we have commission questions on the proposal? Yeah, please. Go ahead.
Are you aware of any cities that have tried to monetize the encroachment or the right-of-way that people assume is theirs, but it is within the city right-of-way?
No.
No.
I haven't looked into it. Yeah.
So the city's suggestion of using the Traffic and Safety Commission as the sort of authoritative body in this instance, and asking us to, review projects based on a set of standards is a little different than what we normally do, in my mind. I mean, we all have fun pointing at streets and thinking about how they could be better, but that's different than hewing to a code that's written. So that to me is a big shift in some ways.
Were you envisioning this to be going forward, or would you go back and assess every property?
I can't imagine assessing every property at this point. I mean, that'd just be a huge amount of work, and talk about political blowback. That would be pretty epic. So I think it would be going forward. And yeah, I would say it's going forward.
Well, you've proposed certain streets.
So, I mean,
Routes.
Yeah, but I wasn't necessarily saying that along those routes where there's current structural encroachment, the city would necessarily go out and say, well, now you have to get a permit, and by the way, you're going to have to pay every year. And by the way, we're not going to allow it because on these streets, we might have a future use here. What my suggestion was on those streets, at least not allow further encroachment. And interestingly, if you go along Marin, once I was aware of this fact, you could actually see that many property owners were aware of it, or at least their contractors were. So there's a lot of places where the front fence is 6 feet back from the sidewalk. And once you start realizing what's going on, you realize, you're like, yeah, it's kind of weird that it would be 6 feet back. Why would it be 6 feet back from the sidewalk? Well, this is the reason. They actually knew where the property line was, and they built it on the property line. So it's not as much of a problem on Marin as you might otherwise think when you start really looking at it in detail.
I'm going to follow up on that because I think that anyone who's done their work with permits has had to pull their parcel map and they know where their property line is. The same thing in my neighborhood. All the houses next to me, everything that they've built, their retaining walls stop 2 feet from the back of sidewalk because that's where the right-of-way line is. I think it is well known if it's been done with permits. So that means anything that is, kind of over the line may not have been permitted, or maybe we just at some point in the past were careless and sloppy, but at this point it's very easy to know and not to violate it. My sense is I do think that space has a lot of potential value. We don't necessarily know today exactly which use is the best thing for it, but it is public property, so it should benefit everybody. And it may be that where there's wide spaces, that's where we want to put bioswales, bike paths, I don't know. But
tow ropes for scooters.
All sorts of different things. I mean, there's, if Nielsen's got lots of, right-of-way within front yards, Nielsen's also super narrow. And I'm not proposing to widen the street, but, someone might say, well, maybe we get the street wide enough that 2 cars could pass each other. That's not what I would recommend, but there's lots of opportunity. And if we give that up by giving away that space, that may be something the long term we might regret. So kind of my inclination is not to allow permanent improvements. Fences are fine. If you want to put a retaining wall there, maybe you've got to, establish a performance bond to take it out at some point in the future. Essentially, that part of the encroachment permit would be to say that you're signing a document that you will remove it at your expense, the homeowner's expense in future if the city comes through with a project that's going to make some improvement along that whole stretch. So I agree that it has a lot of potential value to the public as a whole, and we should acknowledge that, and anything that we're doing should, not preclude someone from being able to use the space in front of their home if we don't currently need it for another purpose, but to make sure that whatever's done there is not permanent and is removable at some point if needed.
I think it would be good to add language about removal at the property owner's expense, just so that's clear.
Mm-hmm.
We're jumping into comments. Is there public comment? Which is fine. But is there public comment on this item before we get back to the commission? And it's 9:26. Should we get a motion to extend?
Meeting published just being till 10?
I don't remember.
Yeah, it was. I can.
All right, onward.
I just had a couple questions. One is if you did, say that people would have to pay to have it removed, would that be retroactive? I mean, would that be somebody's already got something and then they're told now, whether after they already have it? Is any of this retroactive if you start charging people? Or is it going, maybe that's what you were asking earlier about going forward. So none of this would be retroactive. If you already have you already have a retaining wall, the city can't come in and say, you will have to pay for it being removed if we decide we need this property for something else. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
The proposals for discussion, I think both staff and Commissioner Jordan both said they would not be retroactive, but
Right.
I don't think there's any official proposal yet going to any other bodies to make a decision on this yet.
Okay, I
Well,
just was
that,
trying to understand.
The staff report has a section on legalizing existing, which does talk about part of legalizing existing is the property owner signing a document recognizing that it's the city's property and the city can have them remove the structure, I presume.
That is part of some sort of project that
Yeah, we
the
should
owner is
staff.
undertaking, not just, it's my understanding the city's not going to go to me, I'm not doing any projects that you have a retaining wall, you need to sign this.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that, but I don't know, it just, the
Yeah.
bottom part of the staff report says legalizing existing encroachments. So I don't know what staff had in mind with that.
Well, it's just, again, it's definitely for discussion. I think it is, if we're requiring someone who has to build in a retaining wall right now, and we say you got to sign all these things, it does beg the question of what, and their neighbor has exactly the same wall, it doesn't seem like it's a fair arrangement, right? So having a policy that discusses legalization, and again, just for discussion purposes, having it set up so that, okay, if you're getting a permit of a certain significance, then yes, it's time to legalize your encroachment into the city right away by signing something. There are other things that we require people to do when they get to a certain size project, and this just gets added to the list. Again, that's just for discussion purposes. There could be a lot of other good solutions too.
Am I right to assume that the city has the right to remove anything?
Yeah, so
One way or the other?
there's one example of this that came up a few years ago, is at Marin and Santa Fe, alignment of that intersection, where we did, the property owner on the northwest corner had, we ended up building the sidewalk to the property line, and that was previously landscaped by some number of feet. And in that particular case, it was just built into the project. The property owner didn't have to pay anything, and I don't think we even had an agreement about this issue. The project team didn't want to deal with the issue. But the point being, the project absorbed the cost of fixing the landscaping irrigation system, which wasn't a lot in this particular case. It could be a lot more if there was a wall or something.
I guess to me, it seems sort of fraught, because if you put a lot of money into something 10 years ago, and then suddenly the city says, hey, we have the right to make you remove that at your own expense, or we have the right to tell you to, whatever it is, it doesn't, I don't know. It just seems, I understand what Jeff is saying, if somebody has to get permission and somebody else already has it, but I don't know. That just seems difficult to me. I certainly would have an issue with that. Or if I bought a house in Albany and then found out that the entire retaining wall, the city was going to come along and say, by the way, I know you just bought this house and you love the way that's all landscaped in the front with your retaining wall, but you have to remove it and you have to pay for it to remove. That would be difficult. So anyway, it just seems like a complicated thing. I don't know if I have an opinion, but just, that's what stands out for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Other public comment? Harry?
Well, this was really eye-opening to read Commissioner Jordan's report about this. I had no idea. I'm sure a lot of other people had no idea. I think it's important to stick to the principle that public property be used for public good. How to do that is a difficult question, and I, like a lot of the ideas I've heard here, I do want to appreciate what Commissioner Paulson said a couple times, asking about what other cities have done. I think whatever Albany tries to do, if there's some precedent for it somewhere in California that some other city has done this before, it serves us extremely well in saying this is a tried and true solution. If we're going to try to get out ahead and say we're going to invent a new way of dealing with this problem that no other city has even thought about before, it's very risky politically. I don't even know if it could be risky legally, but that's not to say it isn't worth doing, but it might be better done in a coalition, a regional coalition with other cities that have the similar problem. I know that I would guess that the city council would be highly averse to letting Albany get out in front on any issue at all, this issue in particular. To start making a claim about property that is just different from what other people do is going to cause a lot of trouble. So I think some of the suggestions that you've already made tonight are very good, and Commissioner Jovindal's suggestion about how to distinguish projects going forward from ones that have already happened, and people who've used permits and people who haven't. I think those are all good starting points for figuring out how to deal with this. But I do think it's an extremely valuable opportunity and challenge, and I hope we can find a way to put it to good use.
Thank you. Back to the commission.
So commenting on the point that was raised, I think people should have an opportunity to make an informed decision. So if I'm going to build an encroachment and I'm told, here's the conditions under which you'll be allowed to do it, you'll have to pay to remove it if we come through in future want to do something, then I can decide if I want to do it or not. If it's already there and we make this rule, that doesn't really seem fair because the person didn't have a chance to make the decision whether or not to build the encroachment. It was already there when they bought the house, potentially.
I'd say it's not guaranteed that they had the opportunity to make this decision.
Not guaranteed, right.
They may have known.
Exactly. If all your neighbors have a retaining wall 2 feet back and yours is sticking out, it's like, I wonder. Yeah, and you can look at your parcel map. There's ways to know. But, giving the benefit of the doubt, I do feel like we don't want to, and even if someone built an encroachment way back when and maybe got a permit for it, and now we come and add an additional rule, that doesn't seem entirely appropriate. Now, as far as being able to remove it, and maybe at the expense of the project, do something, you can't adversely possess against public property. Just because I built something and it's been there for 50 years in the city's publicly owned right-of-way doesn't mean that the city can't come and say, we're taking it out because we're widening the sidewalk to make space for tree wells or whatever it might be. That already exists. So that's nothing new in this. So I think just, for the going forward permits, putting this requirement on there, I think that would be good. The question becomes when someone's coming to do a home remodel and then we discover they've got an encroaching retaining wall in the front yard and we're going to legalize it after the fact, do we at that point want to say, and now by getting this permit, you do become responsible for removal costs in future? I don't know that I have a strong opinion on that one, but it's a question we probably should answer. That's kind of the middle ground.
So I have a question. So I'm a little confused on the scenario where one property has an structural encroachment that has existed for decades with no permit, and the next property owner wants to come, under the scenario, wants to come in and get a permit for structural encroachment. I don't know, is that a situation when the city's going to say to the next door property owner, well, you have to go to permit too, or it's only going to be when their next door neighbor does work?
Only when they do their own work. I mean,
Okay.
Currently that's when, as I understand it, we kind of say, all right, you got to bring things up to code, is because you're taking on something. As long as you leave it alone, it was okay in the past, it's still okay. It's, kind of the grandfathered in thing. And even if your neighbor comes along and does something new, you haven't made changes to your property that wouldn't trigger any requirements on you.
I mean, I guess the reason I asked that question was Director Bond saying, if one person comes in and they want to build the exact same encroachment the next door neighbor has, and they're going to get charged and they're going to get all these rules, and the other person next door doesn't have any imposition on them. I mean, I'm not in favor of going out and hunting down people when they're not making changes, to be clear.
But there's other things like that, right? There's things that get updated in your permit and requirements that your neighbor didn't have to do 10 years ago if you had to remodel.
So there's precedent for that.
Yeah, because again, this becomes the informed decision thing. I find out it's going to cost me this much, or I have to commit to pay in the future. I decide, am I going to move forward with my project or not? Just because I started the process doesn't mean I have to finish it. If it becomes overly burdensome financially, or I don't like the risks, I can say, well, cancel my application, and now I don't have to fix this.
So yeah, I'm fully in support of that. How much would be the fee for an encroachment, or how much was the fee that was charged for Nielsen, for instance?
I think it was just our standard encroachment fee, encroachment permit fee, which is a couple $100. I don't remember exact amount, but that wasn't because it was, that was just because that's what we had on the books that was closest to it. It wasn't, we don't create a custom fee for every different kind of application. If you follow. So if we did this, we would think about what amount of time goes into processing the application and set the fee to correspond with the time that goes into processing it.
But again, this is, I think this should go to social and economic justice because it's not really the purview of this body, but because this resource is not equitably distributed across the city, I don't see how it's fair to say, if you happen to live where this resource is, you can pay the city $200, $500, $1,000 and get an extra 800 square feet effectively added to your property. So I think there's got to be more nuance and more policy consistency. And I think social and economic justice is the body that is charged with doing that in the city. And I also worry about, as I said, a one-time fee. The property changes hands, people forget, and then 40 years later, the city wants to use that property, and every single property owner on that street has made an encroachment. What is the pragmatic reality of the city prevailing against the political pressure not to take its land back? So legally, it can do it, but I'm more worried about the pragmatic reality of being able to do it. And so that's why I'm suggesting there be some hierarchy of set-asides for exactly what you're talking about, to make that future pragmatic reality, or make that future reality more pragmatically feasible, so we don't allow additional encroachments in places where we can foresee that there's some reasonable likelihood. And so I would suggest, in terms of this idea of the tree wells or increasing the landscape strip and having green infrastructure, that no decision be made until the climate action and adaptation plan at least is developed, because there may be some nexus in that plan that shouldn't be foreclosed.
I'm confident that will be finished before this gets finished. With respect, just back to the fees, just to point of clarification, the fee I was speaking to is the processing fee. If we're going to charge some dollar amount for the use of an area, that's more, it's more of a real estate transaction, and that would be a different thing than what I was referring to. And that might need a Proposition 218 vote of the public. I'd have to double check that. We can charge, set our own fees for our services. I'm not sure about charging a fee for use of property. It might be fine. I want to leave that research question open.
So because it doesn't really address this in the staff report, so was the thinking behind that staff report that it would really, the only charge would be the processing fee essentially, just, like a building permit or whatever?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's just, that doesn't matter what size your parcel is. That's, yeah.
Right. So yeah, I sort of hear three different options on the table. There's that option, there's the option of you have to put up some capital in a bond of some form that will pay for the removal if and when the city wants to do that. Or there's some sort of ongoing annual lease arrangement, which might, trigger this Proposition 218 vote.
I think before there's an annual assessment for somebody to use what they assumed was their front yard, there needs to be like a massive educational outreach about the sidewalk isn't the edge of your property line. And I think everybody just assumes that's where my parcel begins. So yeah, I think that's, before going down that route, there has to be a big effort on that educational piece. And then I have just a question about one of the attachments, and it was the last page of it's the last page of the staff report that had all the pictures on it, and it's the City of Albany street widths. And I was wondering is this accurate? Like, is this? It's the
Staff.
staff report, it's the agenda date, November 5th. That one, yes.
Has been a while.
I believe so. I've never, in my 13 years here, encountered an error in it.
Okay.
But I don't know who prepared it and when, and so.
And then just so I'm like, so the first column width, that's the total right-of-way width? Is that how we should read that?
From
And then-
property line to property line.
Property line,
from one
and
side
then
to the other.
roadway is the road, and then so walk is, like for the first line items, it would be 10 feet on both sides? Is that,
Right, so the roadway is edge of curb to edge of curb.
okay, and then the walk would be
Would be the
the edge of curb
curb, the planter strip, the sidewalk,
Okay.
and then the
to the property line?
yard.
Oh, yeah, okay, thank you.
Other comments?
So I was just going to say, I don't know that I think it's worth the effort that would be involved to charge an ongoing fee. I do think that making sure that, the next property owner is aware, maybe through a deed restriction or something that's recorded with the sale of the property, we can make sure that information is known, or at least could be known.
Has to rise to the level of disclosure.
Yeah,
somehow.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, what about the idea of not allowing encroachments in certain areas in order to make the future possible use of that property by the public more feasible?
If there's locations where we've got sort of pending, plans that we're about to start looking at something that might widen the sidewalks, or, like if we're talking about Solano, where we've got a project that's looking to do improvements there, and we may want to, push the sidewalk back around the tree wells, things like that, we could say, all right, we're not entertaining any encroachment permits because there's work that could be happening in the next few years that would make you have to take it out. So we have reason not to take action now, but something where we have no imminent concepts in mind, I don't know that we would need to.
You could, if I may, designate, you look at your active transportation plan and say, we're going to, for the pedestrian priority and bicycle priority streets, we're not going to do these because
Yeah.
we're not sure where they are, but hopefully that's where we would do
Right.
a wider facility of some sort.
Well,
That makes sense.
But wait, I want to build an accessory dwelling unit. Can I buy the, I'm sorry, not right of way. Can I buy the stuff in front of my house and then lease,
Well, that's why I had
allow use back to the city?
that's why I had the hierarchy.
That was a,
We help people build accessory dwelling units with or without having to buy city property.
I think that's better.
Well, the reason that idea came up is because somebody last fall said to me they wanted to build an ADU, but they were already at the FAR. And so what could they do?
Could you say what FAR is?
Yeah, sorry, floor area ratio. So by zoning, each zone only allows a certain percentage of square footage of the building relative to the square footage of the property. I don't remember what it is. What is it in R1? 0.6, 0.5?
0.55.
0.55. So if you,
Most lots, 0.6 on smaller ones.
so if you have a 2,000 square foot lot, you can build a 1,100 square foot.
1,200. It's a
Okay, we'll get into.
slight, yeah, listen, you say a 5,000 square foot lot, which is a larger one, you can build a 25, 50,
Okay.
the math right?
So if you're at that limit, I mean, obviously that'd be a pretty sizable house, but on a smaller lot, you might be at that limit and you want to build an ADU.
There's also like side yard and rear yard setbacks that you have to meet too. So it's I would guess if they were out of FAR, they would be in the setbacks as well. So there's like hearing your proposal made me very anxious as a planner. But
Do the setbacks apply to ADUs in the same way that they do to the primary dwelling unit?
No. And the particular example you're referring to, I know which example you're referring to, that's an unusual situation. Most people have capacity left to build ADUs and they're not having problems. That's a particular house that is maxed out. And yeah, it would be it's already a large house and it'd be larger. So I don't think you should use that particular example as a problem that you need to solve with this program. Besides which, state law is constantly changing in ADUs, and it's getting easier and easier and easier. And it may be that the state just forces us to throw all this stuff out anyhow. So I think it makes this even more complicated by throwing ADUs into the mix.
Fair enough. Delete.
Yeah.
So that leaves us the three other questions then, as well as the overriding question of equity, which again, I think it should go to social and economic justice to process on the equity question.
We probably want to give them a little more concrete idea of what we want to do before we.
So my thoughts were no permanent improvements. There's nothing that can't be removed. That any newly permitted encroachments should be removable at the owner's expense. The streets identified in the active transportation plan for enhancement should not be eligible for encroachments that might conflict. What else?
Transactions, sale.
Oh, yeah, and recording with the title through deed restriction or whatever mechanism seems appropriate so that information is passed on to future owners.
We have a public comment. Come on up.
I just want to suggest that you be careful about using the active transportation plan, because some of the opportunities that you've found here might be streets that you would never have been able to improve without. Like if Santa Fe was just viewed as impossible, but now with this new realization, maybe we could improve it, that would change the ATP or change the potential ATP. So if you're going to limit this policy, make sure that it covers the streets where your biggest opportunities are.
So I think the policy should reference the ATP, not specifically list the streets. That way, as we update our plan, the policy will update with it.
And there'll be a land rush before the new plan.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
I like it. Some sausage has been made.
Anyone want to add to comments that Commissioner Javandel made, or have other comments?
I disagree about the land rush. I think it would have an overall freezing effect. But
Yeah, right. Does staff have enough direction from us?
Yes, I think we can come back with maybe distilling this a little bit and at a future meeting, make sure that we've got it right and move it forward one step at a time.
Great. All right.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, if I may, just in terms of agenda management.
Yeah, we got some vision
I
here.
don't know if anybody's sticking around for any particular agenda item, but 5.4 you can deal with anytime you want. There's no particular urgency to it.
No.
5.4 is amendments to
5.3 is the Hawk.
5.3 is the Hawk. Okay. So you're here for 5.3. Is anyone here for 5.4?
I'm here for 5.
There you go.
here for 5.4.
Thank you. So we do have 10 minutes. We can go through 5.3.
I move to extend the meeting to 10:20.
I second.
All right. And then we can see where we are after 5.3, and if we need to table 5, sure. All those in favor of extending the time to 10:20?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? All right. Onward. 5.3. So what I was saying is we'll see where we are at the end of 5.3, and if we need to table 5.4. 5.3, post-project evaluation of traffic signal at San Pablo Avenue and Monroe Street and Hawk Beacon at San Pablo Avenue in Dartmouth. Staff?
Thank you. I was just, in case she decides 10:20 is too late, I was going to introduce Gracielita Diaz. You saw her name on some of the reports last month, and she'll probably come before you guys during the summer and present some items. So I wanted to introduce her. She's our graduate student intern.
She's a graduate student at USF and interning in our office.
Wow, welcome, right on.
With that, I'll move on to item 5.3. So this is reporting on improvements that were made as part of the University Village Mixed-Use Development Project. We did evaluation of the San Pablo Avenue, Monroe Street intersection with the signal upgrades that were made there and the Hawk and Street intersection changes at Dartmouth and San Pablo. Staff had a consultant that did earlier work on that, perform a post-project evaluation of the operations. The results showed less delay than were modeled for the project for Monroe-San Pablo intersection, and no changes are recommended by staff at this time. It seems to be working. Staff also asked W-Trans to observe the operation of the Hawk beacon, and they found significant non-compliance by motorists. Caltrans does operate the signal. The easiest, quickest next intervention consider would be to request a sign change and follow up with request for some enforcement education support from the police department. Some more involved changes that are possible, but likely more involved on design, approval, and funding would be to do some changes to the timing of the sequence of the Hawk, or some changes to the infrastructure of it. There are also a couple of locations on San Pablo nearby that are proposed to have Hawk beacons installed, but sounds like those are longer out in the schedule than I anticipated. It's, I think, more like 3 years out now is what's expected. So we can't rely on familiarity being the solution probably to the compliance issue in the short term. And with that, I'll open it up for questions and comments.
Questions?
Yeah, I noticed there was data on compliance, collected on compliance by motorists at the Hawk signal. There wasn't any data on compliance by people who are crossing, sidewalk users and cyclists who are crossing. I don't know if it would be possible to get that, because I think that would be helpful as well in terms of informing, all the users that are using it and what they're doing, and might shed more light on what could be done to increase compliance all around.
Concern being not pressing the button or crossing before they get the walk signal. What's the concern there? Yes, to
All of the above.
Questions?
So that data wasn't collected, I guess is what it wasn't in the table. But.
It wasn't tabulated. I think they used video capture. So in theory, I think someone could go back and count that. I'm not sure what you would do with that exactly. I think people generally know that if they press the button, they get something. I guess the one consideration would be making sure they know to wait for the walk sign, but that's pretty familiar. So I'd have to think about what objective we'd get to go and do that tabulation, what we would be trying to get out of it.
Well, this will get into deliberation. I have some ideas in that regard, potentially.
I haven't used that signal crossing. Can you just, when you approach it on Dartmouth and you're a pedestrian or a bicyclist and you press the button, what do you see on see a walk, or is it?
There's a walk. You don't get it right away because it cycles through a yellow and then a red for the cars. So often one of the compliance issues that I've observed is cars will stop when they see someone approaching and it might be yellow flashing. And so the pedestrian sees that the car has stopped and starts. And so they've made it across and it's very early in the cycle and now cars are waiting at a red and see that the person has gotten across and there's no reason for them to stay other than that they have a signal telling them it's red. So there's some of it I think is the length of the phasing that's not really easy to change, and if there's direct communication with the car and visual and the pedestrian decides they can go early, it sort of exacerbates that to some extent.
Other questions?
So kind of a question here. At times when I've been on San Pablo with the car and stopped at the Hawk, I have trouble seeing the light when I'm stopped at the stop bar. And I don't know if that's something that other people have encountered. If so, I would think that moving the stop bar back would give better visibility. But I don't know if that's
Are there leading carrots, or whatever those are called?
the yield lines.
I'm sorry?
The shark teeth yield lines?
Shark teeth, yeah.
Yeah. I believe that. Yeah, so whatever indication we're using for telling people where to stop, it should be at a point where they've got good visibility of the signal to know, when it's gone to flashing red mode, for example, that now they can stop and go. That's, in operation, perhaps one of the bigger issues that I've encountered using the intersection.
Yes.
So I've spent a lot of time observing the Hawk, and I went back, I did that a few months ago, and then I went back yesterday because I wasn't sure if some changes had been made. I didn't know if that was why it was on the agenda, but as far as I can see, there haven't been any. So if you, the way it works, just if you've never used it, it flashes 6 times yellow, and then there's 5 seconds of a solid red, and then 15 seconds of a flashing red. And during those 20 seconds,
Alternating?
yes, alternating flashing red. So during those 20 seconds of for the yellow 5 seconds, you don't get anything telling you to go. So you have 20 seconds to get across. This is in front of a senior center. The light at Monroe is 30 seconds, and I've timed them several times just to make sure that I just couldn't believe it. So it's 20 seconds. So now that I've got a broken leg, this was perfect that I was testing it out yesterday. So I had my cane, and I walked across as quickly as I could, and there was no way I could get across in 20 seconds. And normally, maybe if I walked pretty quickly. And so there's, in the middle of the street, there's a little island, a little raised area where you can press the button again. But to reach the button, you have to be able to step up on the curb. There's no curb cut. So if you were short, you were using a wheelchair, there's just like no, so you would be trapped in the middle, and you also are now trapped in this area that is in theory safe, but you are actually not on a curb. So you're stuck there. So I can't even begin to understand why it would be 20 seconds. I don't get it. They figured it out at Monroe, which 30 seconds is just barely long enough. So I went into the senior center to get some opinions from them, the people, what they thought of it. But I didn't, the woman I was talking to got interrupted, but basically her big thing is she doesn't understand why there isn't an acknowledgement that this is senior housing. And while I was standing there, I watched a woman to walk from here to there, maybe take 20 minutes, because she was walking very slowly with somebody accompanying her. She would never have made it across that street, even pushing the button twice, so she didn't do that. I also watched 2 people come along, an older child, like a 10 or 11-year-old, and then an adult. Neither of them pushed the button at all and just walked across and dodged traffic. And I don't know if that's because they already knew it wasn't going to work, or I don't know what the reason was. And then I watched the cars, and that was what I did the last time too. And the cars, it's incredibly erratic. Some of them don't even stop at the solid red. They only stop if there's somebody visibly there. They don't stop if the person has already crossed over one lane. So even if it's a blinking red, they're not gonna stop. They treat it like a stop sign in Albany, which means don't stop. So that's how they treat it. So I just don't understand. I cannot understand what is the point of this light. It's dangerous. It's really confusing. People either stop and go, don't stop, whatever it is. Pedestrians can't depend on the people seeing the light, putting another sign there is ridiculous. I mean, really, people are going to be driving along and they're going to like stop and read the sign so they know what to do? Nobody's going to do that. So I just think, why not just turn it into a regular, like the one at Monroe? Like, why? And why add 2 more? So that's why I'm at this meeting, because I just can't wrap my head around what is the function of something that is confusing, dangerous, and not enough time. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess the issues I wanted to comment on were related to my experience of using this as an active transportation user, either walking or bicycling. One problem that wasn't mentioned tonight is the sequence of phases at the Monroe intersection. And that's, if you're bicycling, say you're bicycling south past Sprouts and you get to that intersection, you see a green light and all the cars are moving in the same direction that you're moving, but you also see a red don't walk and don't bike signal. I just can't imagine that anybody is respecting that. I mean, most people who are walking and biking are not very much inclined to respect traffic signals anyway, but that red signal just feels like an insult. Like, why do the cars get to go and I don't? I understand it was some concern from Caltrans about turning movements and right hooks, but I've seen plenty of other places where a design like that can work with the active transportation lane moving in the same green phase as the motor vehicle lane. I was of the understanding that at some point that was going to be changed, and that was like this, somebody insisted on that, but they then decided it wasn't necessary and we could just have a regular walk signal that's on while the light is green. The other thing is, at the hawk signal itself at Dartmouth, the button that you have to press from going from west to east is in a very awkward location. If you're riding a bike and you're in the cycle track, you really can't reach that button. You kind of have to get off your bike and step over to the side to reach it. And I think if you're going the other direction, it's probably even worse, because you're on the north side of Dartmouth Street riding your bike and you have to cross over to the south side. And I remember hearing back in the day when I was on the commission, there was some discussion about asking Caltrans for permission to experiment with a bike-friendly hawk design, which would alleviate some of these problems. So I hope that you can take on some of these challenges too.
Thank you. Back to the commission for comments.
I'd love to start.
Go ahead.
So I've spent many hours in the community room at the Belmont Village, which affords me a great view of people crossing, but not a great view of the traffic. So my perceptions are based on a lot of hours spent watching people successfully cross. But I can't really speak to that many hours of watching how vehicles, drivers, utilize the intersection. I have experienced it. I've been through there a lot, but not the same amount. I actually have had a reaction, and have had this confirmed by others, that for me, a flashing, alternating red light means that I'm at a railroad crossing, and I should absolutely not go anywhere until that's all done. You know, that's my visceral reaction, and I've heard that from others. I realize it's part of the standard, but at the same time, we actually have 4 separate signal heads that are doing the same thing, and they're not very far apart. I mean, they're just the 2 lanes, basically, plus the walk. Yeah, so they're the width of the 2 lanes and the sidewalk arrayed. It's quite impressive. I think the sign is change is an absolute minimum. I'd like to see the sign maybe have a 3rd colored border or something to make it pop a little bit. The one in the staff report is clear and concise and succinct, but we're asking people to read a sign, and that's always a dicey proposition. I have seen newer intersections where there's a reinforcing acknowledgement in some form that the button has been pressed in terms of visually at the opposite sign, walk sign. And that might help improve confidence that there's something going on. You actually, if you're going east, I don't think you can actually see the signals. So you don't know what the vehicle drivers are seeing. I think that's not true if you're going west. I think you can see. But that's further uncertainty. You really can't confirm what's going on. So,
What's the indication on the other side?
the indicate that I've seen?
Yeah.
I've seen a couple. One is a separate, light that goes on. Another one that I really like recently is actually a line of LED color around the walk box. We may not have the wires for that or whatever, but it could be helpful. In answer to Harry's question or comment about the eastern button is on the sidewalk. So we actually designated that portion of sidewalk as part of as a shared cycling and bike path, but it's not actually marked. So the confusion is understandable, or, confusion would be understandable. Let's put it that way. I've looked at the Monroe-San Pablo intersection a lot, and I've waited for the bike light on several occasions, including tonight, and it takes about 1 minute and 30 seconds of cycle, during which time the pedestrians usually just go anyway, and I'm assuming other cyclists do too. Currently, I think all other movements, except for maybe right turns from Monroe to San Pablo, are prohibited at the intersection during the cycling and walking phase. And there is a no turn on red lit up sign that comes up in 2 different places. And I'm wondering, first of all, why wouldn't you also turn on the other walk signals for crossing San Pablo at the same time?
I'm guessing it's duration, because I think the green cycling signal phase is like 15 seconds. I mean, it's pretty short as compared to 30 seconds to cross San Pablo.
Right. And I think Caltrans was going to consider giving northbound traffic on San Pablo green at the same time because they can't cross the path of the cycle track. That's not why it was originally set up the way that you pointed out, but that could be another reason in future why we wouldn't be able to do what you suggested.
I didn't time that, but it's both it appeared to me that the cycling signal and the walk signal came on at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, but I think because it's only 2 lanes, it's like
2
16 seconds or something, as opposed to 30.
Yeah. Anyway, the minute and 30 seconds makes for lower compliance and frustration.
Yeah.
The other problem I had at that intersection was when I was northbound, people turning right onto San Pablo from Monroe aren't paying as much attention. If they're stopping, checking traffic, looking at the crosswalk, they're not necessarily looking also at the cycle track. I have had the experience of having a green light and having a car pull into my space when I'm legally crossing.
And that's despite the no right turn on red whatever
Well,
it
so
is that
that's
comes up.
different. So the no right turn on red signal head is from San Pablo right turners.
Oh, I see.
This is from Monroe to San
Yeah.
Pablo.
So we may need one more of those.
So they're allowed to turn right on red. There's a potential conflict with the cycle track.
Yes. And it's a visibility issue. There's some plantings, a sign, poles that it's just not that visible.
Who wants to comment next?
So, yeah, I'm all in favor of changing the sign. I mean, maybe that only gets another 2% of the 100% compliance, but it certainly can't.
Is there
can't
a
hurt.
sign now? There's,
There's a sign now that's unlike any other hawk I've seen images of doing a Google search. So the sign now just says stop on red.
Yeah.
okay.
And what it really needs to say is solid red equals stoplight,
Yeah, yeah.
flashing red equals stop sign. So people, can translate it to what they want. Yeah, I think it's kind of odd. I think it's unfortunate that it's two reds, so it's more like the railroad crossing instead of a single red, because, when you take your driving test, a single red flashing is, you treat it like a stop sign. We all know that. Late at night, signals, whatever, go over to that mode, and it's a stop sign. So it would be more familiar that way. And I guess it goes to this device was, I believe, invented in Arizona, so I don't know what other signals look like in Arizona. Maybe they look like this.
Can I respond to that? I actually found something that I haven't been able to re-find on the internet that said that the designation was that there had to be more than just one light flashing. So my interpretation was that, this triangular orientation of the lights is so that you have more than one red light flashing at an intersection in case one goes out. Well, it's certainly not how it's been implemented or how the NACTO standard reads, but my interpretation of what I found was that we've sort of plastered, especially the southbound end, with all of these identical signal heads. Wouldn't it be great if we had the leeway to make them single red and orange and not have that confusion?
Yeah, absolutely, because like I said, I think there's three, four, four facing south. Wow. But, I think it's beyond us to redesign it. It's an approved standard device, so we're not going to be able to redesign it in the moment and get it approved and go there. That's, unless Fareed says something different, but I don't think that's where we want to go.
We could turn off one red light in each of the signal heads.
Well, you'd have to get Caltrans to turn off one red light. Good luck with that.
Or a BB gun.
Yeah. I think that I think you caught some of the flavor of why I thought having, if they have the video, to go back and do a count and figure out how did people cross? How many people that crossed actually activated it? There was something in the table about number of activations, which actually was pretty high. I think it was like 44 in 2 hours or something. So it's once every 3 minutes or something. So it's actually getting use. What I've seen and what I've experienced is the flashing orange comes on and some motorists stop. And so then I'm standing there and I'm either kind of a jerk because I won't go, or I go and I'm completely messing everything up. So I think the flashing orange phase, and you timed it, Julie? Is it 5 seconds for both the flashing orange and the solid orange?
It flashes, yeah, it is, because it flashes 5 times or 6 times, the yellow.
Right.
6 times, yeah. And then you can't go because it doesn't say to go. And then there's 5 seconds of solid red, and then 5 seconds, 15 seconds
of flash.
alternating.
But I thought there was a solid orange phase in there too. I thought there was a flashing orange, solid red, flashing red. So I wonder if the flashing.
Yeah, it's 6 flashes of yellow. I guess the last one is a solid yellow, but it's very brief.
It's brief, okay.
Yeah. And then 5 seconds of solid red, and then blinking for 15 seconds.
So I kind of wonder, I don't know, if that could be titrated to be a little shorter.
I think,
somehow.
like for me, driver, if you explained, stop on red, you can go on flashing, that might solve the orange or the flash. Like, people may be more comfortable understanding when they actually need to stop.
Right.
They may be more willing to drive or move during the
flashing
during the yellow
orange.
flashing, yeah.
I mean, the flashing orange is, to me, another confusing element because I don't know if they still exist. On Buchanan, they did it one time. I think they're there, but there's flashing orange beacon is a standard beacon to warn people that there's a crosswalk coming up. So it kind of puts people in mind, I've got to be prepared to stop for, if I see a pedestrian, I have to be prepared to stop. And then they hit this flashing orange and it means, no, you're supposed to treat this like an orange and a regular stop and a regular signal. So I mean, I agree. I've come to the conclusion that it would have been much better to put a regular signal in there. And I think the reason that that wasn't done that I'm aware of, and that it probably wouldn't be done on Virginia, is because of the fear of incenting more motorists to use Dartmouth. But because the left turn is cut off, I don't think that really actually would have materialized, really. So unless these things get a higher compliance, unless they get more common, I think our best solution in the long run is to convert the thing at huge expense to a regular signal.
Can we get a motion to extend time to 10:30? You guys want to go longer?
I move to extend time to 10:35.
Second.
All right, there you go. Good compromise. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? All right, let's move on. Or continue.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I imagine the duration of the signal phases, well, I don't know. Is that something that's in standards, or is that something that there's a little more flexibility around?
The durations for the pedestrian signals are based on walk speeds.
But how about the orange phase, you think, on something like this?
Hey, usually it's designed to provide approaching motorist time to come to a stop.
Right.
We used to think about it as like 1 second per 10 miles an hour, so,
Right, so this is too long then.
probably.
Yeah, because I mean, it's way longer than an orange on a regular traffic signal. So I would think it could be shortened up, and that might, again, we might get another 2%, so now we're at 80% instead of 75%.
Yep.
And, I think it's kind of like immunization. Once you're pushing towards a little over 90, you've got kind of herd immunity at that point.
Everyone else follows the lead.
Yeah, and then on the Monroe signal, and I haven't driven it in quite a long time, but there was an anecdote that was shared with me, and then I experienced it myself as a driver where, the driver in the right going southbound, the motorist in the right lane, peripheral vision, cycling phase went green, they went right through the red. Now, in all cases, the motorist was going straight, so there was no conflicting movement, so it didn't result in an accident. But it did suggest that if that's still going on, and maybe it isn't because most people that drive through there now have figured it out, but if it's still going on, and again, I don't know if there's video of that intersection, it'd be useful to look at, that I believe it would be possible to shield the cycling signal head so it's not as visible to southbound motorists, but it is visible to people on the cycle track. Another thought that Will and I support, and I don't know why they haven't implemented, allowing motorists northbound, give them a green when the cycle track has a green. There's no reason they shouldn't be allowed to go. I mean, I would just think, that's just creating annoyance and non-compliance. Not that people are particularly non-compliant there that I've observed, but it just sort of reinforces traffic devices don't make sense. And then in terms of non-compliance on the cycle track, there was some thought at one time that during the green southbound phase for motorists, when the pedestrian signal was counting down, that instead of the cycling signal having gone to red, that it could be flashing orange. So to kind of warn cyclists, okay, you can go, but it's on you because there might be a right-turning motorist. Now, I don't know if Caltrans would ever go for that, but that might strike a happier medium where you get more people complying with something rather than nothing at all because they're not going to wait a minute and a half.
So in that situation, the pedestrian has a blinking don't walk, and then the cycle track has a red
I think that's correct. I might be wrong. It might be that, actually, I think what's going on is I think the countdown's only 20 seconds, but I think the southbound green is like a minute. So I think actually both pedestrian and cycling signal are red.
Stopped, yeah.
And then you're sitting there and you know, as Ken said, motorists are going by, 40 seconds, you're stuck there.
Well, the walk button does, on some streets will respond when you're aligned with the movements of traffic and change the signal head immediately.
Oh, right, you get recall, pedestrian recall, yeah.
Well, recall, I think means something different, but, yeah,
It's actuated.
isn't recall
think it's
what
called
automatic?
Recall's automatic.
Okay, so what is it when?
So it's a mid-sequence glom on
If there's time.
if there's time, and that seems to be omitted completely there.
Yeah, so that would be that might be the solution.
That's a good thing.
Although what you were saying about the orange, so that would be a walk signal and orange light.
Right. Do you know, does the no right turn on red come on when, well, I guess you wouldn't know, because they're both going, both sidewalk user and cycle track are getting the go at the same time.
And the red arrow always comes on, because whether it's an activation through the pavement or the button.
So I guess the question would be, would the red arrow come on when somebody presses for a sidewalk user crossing partway through? If that makes sense. So 30 seconds in, somebody shows up on the sidewalk, they push the button. Does the red no right turn come back on for them or not?
Well, right now, not, because it doesn't work that way.
Okay.
Because it would interrupt the southbound traffic phase.
Right.
Yeah.
You've given us a lot of rope here.
Yeah. You've got 10 minutes, so we're
Jump in any time and
All right.
help us frame this discussion.
Well, I wasn't here during the discussions with Caltrans, but my understanding was they wanted it to be only when there's no conflicts, which is why there's not the permissive turns crossing with the cycle track or pedestrian crossings. I don't know if they've changed since we went through that process with them or not, and whether there's more flexibility. My understanding is they wanted to create the compliance issue because they wanted to have no potential conflicts between the right turn motorists.
They were very nervous about this whole intersection when we were designing it. So, yeah, there were.
Well, I mean, it was kind of first of a kind for them, wasn't it?
And now they're proposing several of their own.
Well, not with you mean with the cycle track?
No.
Right, with the Hawk.
The Hawk.
Yeah.
So, it might be worthwhile to go back to them and we're starting with you, but we can go back to them and say, here's some analysis we've done, here's some observations we have to share. We think this can be improved and get the reaction to it.
No.
Well, and the level of service has not been impacted as much as expected.
Right, that's a good point.
So we've got a reason we can ask for more phase for other things, I would think.
So yeah, we like the sign. We think that the flashing yellow should be reduced, most likely. We think that at Monroe, the bike signal should go to a flashing yellow while the ped signal is in its countdown mode.
Although I might be wrong about that. It might stay green the whole time. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I think the issue there, again, is those are short compared to the green phase for the motorists. So.
Yeah.
Shielding.
Yeah, shielding
the bike signal head from the motorist lane.
Yeah.
In the southbound direction.
Southbound, yeah.
If it can be done. I think that the orange flashing option, I believe I heard that happens, or that's implemented in San Francisco on the Panhandle, where there's, call it a bike path, cycle track, whatever. It's parallel to Fell, I think. And I believe I heard, I haven't experienced it myself, that goes to an orange flashing. Now, it's not a Caltrans facility, but at least it's a precedent that they can look at accident statistics there and see what the situation is.
Are there turns into that? Left turns? Would it be?
Yeah, it's left turns. So it's not precisely analogous. I mean, Fell's one way, so it's, but the cross street's two way, so it's not exactly analogous, but it's pretty close.
Yeah.
So on the hawk signal, the issue of the midpoint button was brought up, and this has been brought to our attention before, and
Yeah, we brought this up.
it also only points one direction.
There should be one each direction.
Quickly. I actually videotaped the light, so, and then tried to time it at the same time, so I was just now timing it with my husband's time. So the yellow stays yellow solid for 5 seconds.
Solid. So
Yeah.
it's got 6
Flashes.
flashes and then 5 seconds
And
is
it's
solid.
5 seconds.
So it's
Yeah,
like
and-
8 seconds or something
yeah.
total. I mean, that's,
And the red, this is weird, because when I was doing it, I was standing there timing it, but now that I'm timing my own video, the red actually looks like it stays solid for 5 seconds and then is flashing so it's actually 25 seconds
it's flashing for 20.
for 20, or close to 20.
Yeah, okay.
When I try to time it. I just wanted to update you on that, because I forgot I actually videoed it.
That's great. That's awesome. Real data, real time. But yeah, so if it's 8 seconds or 7 seconds, I mean, that's just crazy long.
Any other?
The only other thing was taking a look at the stop bar or yield line location, maybe shifting that.
Right, we want you back far enough so that you can see all 4 of the signal heads at the same time.
At least the one right in front of you.
And then
That's not enough for me.
then you become a Manchurian candidate.
Spread
For yourself.
At AC Transit, the operators have a lot of confusion with this, so it's a controlled environment, fortunately, and operators are trained to be more defensive driving, so they just wait. They're not really sure what to do, and so they're just stopping there. We had to issue bulletins to our operators and say, hey, here's a diagram of how a hawk works and when you're supposed to go and when you're not supposed to go. Can't do that to the general public, so the signage would be a really good thing. I think we should wait to see if we can get more compliance before we do any type of confirmation for the bike or the pedestrian crossing, because there's too much confusion going on right now, I think. But maybe at some point, we get higher compliance, then that would work.
You mean before we try and implement a cycling cycle head?
Yeah.
Signal head?
Or no, the extra confirmation on the opposite side of the Hawk intersection that you've activated something as a pedestrian or a cyclist.
It's a nice to do.
Yeah.
I also like the sign. I think it would be very helpful, because I don't know how to approach this, and I do what the car in front of me is doing, and, you know, I don't drive on San Pablo that often. I've seen a couple of the examples, and I personally like the sign that has the red light and then the, like,
Right.
as opposed just to text. I think that's.
Process, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
Visual
easier to process, and I mean, you see it once and you're like, oh, that's how this works, and then we'll all move through the intersection a little quicker, I think, so.
Okay, any other comments on this one? Staff, you got enough?
I think so.
Is that all?
We always deliver.
Once you get into it, yeah.
Such a car.
Okay, so we are going to,
Thank you for coming and sharing all that.
thank you for your assistance, appreciate it.
It just makes it longer, so people can cross.
Oh, yeah, that. We didn't add that. Yeah, yeah. Check the timing on the crossing. Yeah,
Thank you.
that it meets standard.
That's a good point. 5.4, we will table until the next meeting in June. Item 6 is announcements. Staff says 6.1 is just what the council approved.
Yes, just updating the commission that council at its May 6th meeting approved the blue curb policy update that the commission reviewed, the driveway red curb policy, and the enhanced visibility crosswalk standard.
Can I add? You know, I attended the low-income housing project tonight, meeting and announcements, and was pleasantly confirmed that they are looking to either provide space for or possibly implement part of the bike path that we were talking about before, the Pierce Street bike path, in a reasonable way. So they expect to put together a parking plan, and I expect we'll see that at some point. At least they announced they were doing that.
Yeah, that's what was presented tonight. This was a meeting that was hosted by Saha at the community center. They're in the very preliminary stages. We're still in negotiations over a lot of aspects of the project. They're you know, in terms of what the project funding is and the population to be served and so forth. That's very much in flux, and it depends on where they get their financing. So it's kind of a multidimensional problem for them to solve. But what they did show, and we'll get that and post it on the webpage so everybody can see it, is some preliminary sketches of a 60-unit, a total of 4-story building at the corner of Washington and Cleveland. And they made a nice presentation about the different physical elements of the building, including the alignment for a bikeway from the west side of the park, the existing park. And in order to get the slopes right, it has a kind of a sweeping turn and then lands down.
Oxbow.
Yeah. And then lands at essentially next to the entrance to the project on Cleveland.
So
Leading to a crosswalk that leads to our beautiful, fully implemented Pierce Street connector to the right, sorry.
I think Saha applied for grants for low-income developments in Berkeley, and there's one grant where you can get, if you can show greenhouse gas reductions, then you get extra dollars, and so you get dollars for transportation improvements, as well as for the housing itself.
It's the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Grant.
Yeah. So I don't know if that qualifies here.
We've talked to them about that program, and I'm not, like I said, we don't know how they're going to finance the project yet. They're quite a ways away from nailing that down, but they know about that program.
Okay, good. But that gets money for transportation infrastructure improvements. Okay. Anything else on announcements? No?
Bike About Town is ending, and there's a biking movie tomorrow night. Pee-wee's Big Adventure at the community center. Oh, boy! Oh, please.
There's a fundraiser at Wild Card. What is it, Tasting Room, I guess? I'm not sure what their official name is, but on Solano, it's a fundraiser on Saturday. So for every pint somebody drinks, $1 goes to charity. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay. Item 7 is future agenda items. Is there anything staff wants to mention or mission?
I'm hoping to get that curb ramp standard fixed once and for all in black and white sooner rather than later, so it can take effect for as many projects as possible.
Okay. Anything else? Staff, is there any future agenda items that we want to go over?
I can update you on what's in the queue if that's of interest. So the high school loading zones has been continued, so that should come back next month. We're working on the concept for the Albany intersection improvements to bring to the commission. Climate action and adaptation plan draft should come to the commission, I believe, next month. Cornese's Creek, 90% designs we should be getting from the consultant shortly. And we're working on the collision data to bring to you.
Okay, sounds good. Item 8 is next meeting, Thursday, June 27th, 7 p.m.
I will be out of town.
Okay, good to know. Will we have a quorum?
I might be too.
I will be here.
I will be here. So we do have a quorum.
Well, here, just go right ahead. That's fine.
Yes, fine. We can move on over.
You can have it right now. You can have it right now.
All right. Sounds good. And we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
All right.